the more experienced coaches I hear talk about, whether it's assessment or just like athlete development, the conversation is just like, it reverts back to the basics. And it's just like, well, like this person, do they look like they would be good enough at this sport to compete at a high level? Like, no. Okay. Then you need to, create structure to the point where you look the part, and then you'll probably be able to express a little bit closer to what you need to be able to express. Like, it's just like the most simple things that you need to go back and kind of relook at for a lot of people.
Yeah. And you need to like embrace the process around that. Right. And like, so that's why I talk about, like, if you know, and you would know this, but like people listening, like I'm an OPEX coach. I've been involved in OPEX for like 10 years. And so I like James would have influence over things like beliefs of mine too. Right. Like, so, but I would say like you should know some of the history. That's what made me think of that. Right. Like you should know kind of like how this thing started, who's won, like, what did they do when they had success? Like, how did, Miko break onto the scene and then all of a sudden redo all of the workouts from all the previous games in one day and beat all of the times, right? And you're like, oh, because he was more elite of an athlete, right? And then his training was like already the strength and conditioning, where it was like I don't even know. Are you old enough? But like, so there was a video, right? Like when Miko's movies first came out and stuff, right? It was like blown away where they were like, oh, so you snatch heavy, like imagine it as like A, B, C in a workout, then multiple Metcons, right? Like every program looks like now, like, Misfits got 18 pieces to it or whatever, and you pick and choose, right? But like, so Miko would be like, well, I like call it like I have a primer, I have a main lift, I have an accessory lift, and then I do the Metcon. That's why I'm stronger than everybody. And the stuff I do before is like snatch. Then I go do the snatch and the pull-up workout, but it's only at 135, but I snatch 225, right? So like it doesn't feel like it's a big deal to me.
Right.
And that was like mind blowing, where people were like, you don't just do Diane that day and that's all you do? Like, that's it? And he was like, no. And then I do it again at night. And you're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Like,
but I mean, part of that too is like the demands of the sport have changed over time too, because it's like in 2007, there was three workouts and that was it. And like 2008, there was, I forget, like a couple, but that was it. And then it was like all of a sudden by the time 2010, I think is when they moved to like StubHub Center. That was like all of a sudden it like ballooned where all these events over multiple days. And I feel like the training lagged behind, where it's like people are still training like it was like the original like .com type workouts. And I was like, well, that's not the way you would train for the sport when now it has 12 events in a weekend. Like you need to be prepared for that if you're at that level.
And people don't understand that, like, and that's where people see it now. And it's like, like you have to snatch 275 to get to the games, right? Like everybody knows that. Like you just have to be able to do it, and 300 or more to be competitive, right? So, but it's like they don't realize that like when it started, 185 was like an outrageous snatch, right? And why would that be important? Because it's your first day. And if you expect that you're going to be better than who was considered the fittest person in the sport 10 years ago on day one, because you're not doing 275, like, are you kidding me? That was a 10-year development, right?
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's why I think it's like important to know that a little bit too, right? Like, those weights at like the old workouts where you're like, oh, I see 275 at like 1.5 body weight for a deadlift in that workout, and then a 135 squat clean and a body weight bench press was hard, right? That wasn't like the second part of a workout that you were going to do, right? Oh, I see now, right? Like, so the expectation of like, well, I'm going to come in on day one, and I just saw that Rich does that in the morning, and then he does 40 muscle ups per time at night going into a heavy snatch, right? Like, well, yeah, he does. And he started 12 years ago.
Oh
and
yeah.
it's super easy for him.
Right. And that's part of that's
Right?
why I can do it every day.
Yeah, yeah, right. Like and that's like that's sustainable for him. It's not for you. You'll be done. And so that's where it's that. And to what you were saying, like that's where I think a lot of what where you're like, oh, these older coaches have been in it or whatever, or someone who's got a lot of experience, like that's what they're saying when they're like, you just need to go do more fundamentals. Like I don't have time to tell you the history of this sport in this book and watch these 8 documentaries with you so you have a little bit better picture of what you're trying to get into, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I mean, yeah, I'm 43, so it's going to sound like a cranky old man, but like a lot of times the instant like gratification thing now with like social media and being able to be out there and do that, and like I'm a big basketball fan, so I think of that and I'm like, well, people don't know, they don't see the videos as much of like, they love Steph Curry's 3-pointers and all the little kids, if you go to that, want to shoot from half court and shoot threes, right? But they like the part I don't look, because that's what's on there, right? And so it's like the highlights and they get to see the cool part. It's like you don't see as many of the videos of like Steph would be like as a going into college when he was under recruited, right? Like they'd go to those huge camps, 50 best players or whatever, and he'd get to be the 50th one. And he like the coaches walk in, Coach K and those guys would walk in, and there's like old videos of him, like he'd been there for an hour already warmed up, right? And he's like in a full sweat as the other kids are coming in to warm up, right? And like they don't see that, right? That like the price to pay started so far ago before you shoot 30 footers, right? And just like a skinny little kid, and that carries over to other sports.
Yeah.
Right. And the lack of patience around that is hard to deal with.